Hi, I'm Faith McInerney, and welcome to part 2 of Chiron and the 4 asteroids. Today we're going to be talking about Ceres in aspect to Chiron. So, a little delineation. Chiron has to do with what is injured as well as what is healed. Ceres has to do with fertility, food, vegetation of all kinds, and that which is ingested orally. Vitamins, herbs, anything that you take in your mouth for any kind, like food, that's Ceres. So when you see Ceres in aspect to Chiron, it'll have to do with fertility and reproductive issues. It'll have to do with food and health, good or ill. It'll have to do with nutritional disease and with oral transmission of disease. Certain diseases, in fact, even if we looked at COVID people, we might even see some, I don't know, we don't have enough information yet. Someday it'll be interesting to see what people had when they got infected. But at any rate, other diseases that have oral transmission have some Ceres Chiron likelihood. So it also has to do with animals. And Ceres Chiron has to do with helping animals, and it also has to do with human injury to and from animals. Before we get to more delineation, let's get technical for just a minute. This video is about delineating, but reading aspects is a two-step process. We need to understand the meaning, and we need to be able to identify the aspect when it occurs. So there's many ways to see occurrences of planetary contacts, traditional and non-traditional, and to maximize the number of contacts that I can see, I use both. So it's not essential to your understanding of the meaning of Ceres Chiron. You'll understand just as much without any of these non-traditional formats. But the next two slides will explain the techniques. They're much simpler than you think. So we're going to be looking at one aspect, Ceres Chiron, and we're going to be looking at it in 4 different formats. Here it is on a wheel. And we cannot see, this is a good example, this is a good bad example, because we can't see the aspect on a traditional wheel. That's kind of the point. We can't see the aspect on a traditional wheel. So there's 2 kinds of dials. That's the alternative. That's the non-traditional. There are 2 kinds of dials we can go to. There's probably more than 2. But there's 2 kinds of dials that I use that we could go to. And one of them is the 90-degree dial, and we can see that the aspect falls on the arrow and the dot. Here's the Ceres, here's the Chiron. One is on an arrow, one is on a dot. That's an aspect. My preference is the 22.5-degree sword, a 22.5-degree dial. It takes all of these points that are lined up around the dot, and all of these points that are lined up around the arrow, and it makes them all look like one big conjunction. But in that conjunction, we see that Ceres is in aspect to Chiron. So we're going to be looking at dials, at the 22.5-degree dial. When you see Ceres Chiron, it will always look like a conjunction. Period. And it'll be just like the traditional meanings of Ceres Chiron, but alternative formats. Here's the same aspect in linear format. This is a sort, and the benefit of the sort, why we use them, is you can see the orb. We can see that the orb of Ceres and Chiron is 22 minutes orb. Here are the original positions. 5 of mutable and 28 of mutable, and we can see that there's only 22 minutes orb between that Ceres and Chiron. And that is going to be helpful when we see progressions, and we're going to see progressions very soon. Now, a word about midpoints. Midpoints are exactly like aspects. They blend the meanings of the planets involved. They're complicated only when you're looking at a lot of different midpoints, but we're not going to be. We're going to be looking at Ceres Chiron, first of all, and that's all. And we're going to be looking at it in 2 midpoint pictures. One is the sun at the midpoint of Ceres Chiron, And this is what it looks like. It's in this particular situation, it's a 5-minute orb. And it's expressed as sun equals Ceres Chiron, 5 minutes orb. The other point we're going to be looking at is the Aries point. All you need to know is that the Aries point is as important as the sun, that any aspects and midpoints that line up with the Aries point are as important as the sun. And this is the way it looks. Aries equals Ceres, or Chiron Ceres, 2 minutes orb. It is exactly equal to sun equals Chiron Ceres. The numbers will always line up this way, and the delineations are always going to be identical to traditional aspects. So let's go back to our delineations. One of the ways that Ceres Chiron shows up is in the charts of obstetricians. I did a small sample of 11 obstetricians. 9 of them had Ceres Chiron by major aspect or prominent midpoint picture, and 3 out of the 11 had it in the control group. So we're talking 81% versus 27%. I don't know if I've got Winston Churchill on this set of slides. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But I want to tell you the Winston Churchill story, because when he was in the control group, he had Ceres Chiron, and he was in the control group. So I did a quick progression of what happened when progressed Chiron came to Ceres, and his wife had a operation, gynecological operation. I don't know how much it changed their lives, in all honesty, why it showed up in his natal chart that way, but that's what happened when he had the progression, so he fulfilled some natal symbolism with that progression. So Ceres Chiron, the Chiron influence can occur at any stage of parenting. Here we have the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate Middleton, and she has the natal aspect, and here she is. She's got Aries equals Ceres Chiron, or equals Chiron Ceres. And here's her story. She suffered from morning sickness with all 3 of her pregnancies. 9 months before her first child was born, there was a transiting Ceres station. I wouldn't count the days 9 months before the child was born, but because Ceres was stationing pretty much that month, it was easy to use that month and say that Ceres was semi-squaring her natal Chiron, and transiting Chiron stationed in aspect to natal Ceres, and that's what it looked like. Ceres was aspecting natal Chiron. I don't think we have Chiron to Ceres. For her second pregnancy, it showed up in her solar return, where she had Ceres Chiron ascendant. Here we go. And for her third pregnancy, when they announced she was supposed to show up at some event, and they announced that morning sickness was keeping her from the event, and transiting Chiron was 12 minutes from her natal Ceres when that happened. So that's one delineation we can talk about Ceres Chiron at this stage of parenting, is that for some people, it has to do with a difficult pregnancy. So it can happen at various stages of parenting or non-parenting. What we can say is that reproductive efforts and reproductive health are not typical and may require medical intervention. And here we go with Octomom, who was born with the sun equals Ceres Chiron, or Chiron Ceres. When the octuplets were born in 09, she had the ascendant solar arc, her Chiron Ceres, and transiting Ceres equal transiting Chiron. We'll see that, you see that all the time. If it's a big event, and the birth of octuplets is kind of a big event, when there's a big event like this, it'll show up in the sky commonly, and it was triggering her natal Chiron. So she had Ceres Chiron transiting her natal Chiron, and she gave birth to octuplets. When Elton John had a baby born with a surrogate, progressed Chiron was 1 minute from Ceres. And when he had a second baby born the same way, progressed Chiron was, it had, sort of progressed 6 minutes from where it was, and it was now 5 minutes past the Ceres. But basically, he had his children with Ceres Chiron. It's very common in the horoscopes of illegitimate children. I hate that term, but I'm going to use it just, to cut to the chase here, both in the charts of those children as well as their parents. Saturn Chiron also. For years, I went with Saturn Chiron and orphans and abandoned. But when I did a lot of Ceres Chiron work, I saw that it was just as common, if not more common, than Saturn Chiron. And talk about all stages of parenting and non-parenting. This was Norma McCorvey. The Roe in Roe v. Wade was a Ceres Chiron person. But just to say that it's a Ceres Chiron is not the only picture for abortion, because we also see Ceres with Hades with abortion as well. But she's a good example of the various stage of parenting or not parenting. Here are more parenting, non-parenting Ceres Chiron stories. So here's a mother who harmed her child. She drowned her children. Now, these are the transits a month before the event, because what happened was that Chiron stationed conjunct her Ceres. Chiron stationed conjunct her Ceres the entire month before she drowned her children. So I would say this probably built up in her, and it led to the event. She had no natal aspect, by the way. Now here's an eye-opener. It shows up in the charts of fathers as well. Here's Charles Lindbergh's chart. He has no natal aspect. When his baby was kidnapped, he had a conjunction. Ceres was conjunct natal Chiron. When Lizzie Borden killed her father, he had an aspect of, he had natal Ceres Chiron. This is the father's chart. He was killed by his daughter. So when she killed her father, he had transiting Ceres triggering his Ceres Chiron. And when W.C. Fields signed an agreement to support his child, the agreement said, W.C. Fields is not the father of my child. It was with that he decided he would pay for child support. And what was happening was that he was having his Chiron return. And as you can see, he had natal Ceres Chiron with transiting Chiron return triggering that Ceres Chiron. So we can say that the Chiron influence can occur at various stages of parenting or non-parenting to and from children, father or mother. So let's talk about Ceres Chiron and food, because it has to do with food and anything that's ingestible, herbs. So Ceres Chiron has to do with feeding the hungry. I put it in red because I actually have been looking high and low for more illustrations. I found a couple, which we're going to look at in a minute, but let's just say the research is still ongoing. It's a work in progress. But I know for sure it has to do with over and under eating, dietary changes to improve health, even when some of them are questionable, food safety and unsafe food, food-related disease like allergy, poison, and other orally transmitted diseases. Now, in terms of these conditions, particularly about overeating and undereating, Saturn in Cancer and a fourth house Saturn will say the same thing. They are always a little too fat or a little too skinny. That's Saturn in Cancer. And you see it with many Ceres Chiron people too. So let's talk about food safety for a minute. When Pasteur, who has no natal aspect, came to the realization that he discovered pasteurization, retarded spoilage of milk and beverages, transiting Chiron was conjunct natal Ceres. When the FDA reassessed food safety and decided Jell-O and Lucky Charms should have warnings, this is a transit. There was a transit of Venus and Ceres, by the way, which is common with sweet food, and Chiron was a part of the whole thing. So we saw Venus, Ceres, and Chiron conjunct, and these kinds of foods were discussed, artificial coloring, and you get the idea, dangerous food. Now, the other thing that happened on a transiting aspect, what was this? This was a semi-square, was a stomach-friendly coffee for people who couldn't stand high-acid coffee. And these were the transits, but it's the Ceres Chiron we're the most interested in here for people for whom coffee was injurious. Now, here we have some examples, really a scant few, for people who helped the hungry. Werner Erhard has the natal picture, and it was triggered by a Ceres station when he came up with the idea for the Hunger Project. Queen Victoria, many kids, but one of her kids hosted free dinners for poor people. And one of her dinners was attended by 3,000 people, and this is what showed up in her solar return. She had MC equals Ceres Chiron and natal MC equals Ceres Chiron. And here's somebody in our generation, or anyway, alive at our time, who is the national ambassador against hunger, and she's the rapper, KC Concepcion, and she has Ceres Chiron. What's more common is starvation, unfortunately, and these are the leaders who facilitated starvation. In our lifetime, we see it in Venezuela, and Maduro has Aries equals Ceres Chiron. He also, if I'm not mistaken, he's got the opposition. Yes, he does. Chiron is at 8 and Ceres is at 6. It's an opposition, and he's got it at the Aries point. Mao had the natal conjunction. It was exact by progression in 1959, and that started the Great Famine. Between 15 and 40 million people died in the Great Famine. And so Mao had the conjunction, came exact by progression. He died, and then Deng Xiaoping inherited and solved the problem. He had the natal semi-square. We're not looking at him here, but you'll take my word for it. Now, Queen Victoria was labeled the famine queen, and you can see the Ceres Chiron here. Well, there's funny stories about her eating, but let's do the famine thing first. So when she visited Ireland, this is an example of how the arcs work. We're going to spend 10 seconds on this. When she visited Ireland, she had Ceres Chiron natally. We're looking at it on a dial. Here we're looking at but this dial will give us solar arcs. This dial cannot. So we're going to, to the heavy lifter here. And so when she had a solar arc of Ceres Chiron come to the Aries point precisely, she visited Ireland. She visited a starving country. It was at the tail end of the starvation period, but there it was. She visited the country. Now, here's a funny story about eating with Queen Victoria. She was a very quick eater, apparently. Everything was protocol. She was served first. Everybody down the table was served. By the time the last person was served, she was finished. They had to gobble their food so that she could get her next course. And so they said eating with her was purgatory. Ceres Chiron. Now, Ceres Chiron is also the oral transmission of disease. And you see it in a big range of diseases from bad breath to polio to AIDS. It doesn't signify the disease. In my take on it, it signifies the means of transmission. So it appears with regularity in the natal or solar return charts of victims. Either they were born with it, or when they got the disease, they had Ceres Chiron in their solar return, with polio and with certain occurrences of AIDS. With cholera and hepatitis, where contaminated food and water are the culprits, and with TB and smallpox, which airborne illnesses emanate from saliva. That's why I'm wondering about how the virus will eventually show up in people's horoscopes. I have an opinion about the transits and Neptune Apollon, but it's how it shows up in the individuals will be interesting. So poison is one of the ways Ceres Chiron works because it's an ingestible and it's harmful. Jim Jones had the natal chart, Jones and Jonestown, and people drank the Kool-Aid. So he had it in his natal chart, which is here, Sun equals Ceres Chiron. But it also showed up in the 1978 solar return when, I think this is the solar return. So he had it in the natal chart and it showed up in his solar return when all of those people drank the Kool-Aid. Now, he also had Neptune Ceres, which is an alternative picture for poison. Not that you're going to need these pictures, hopefully, but that is an alternative picture. When Hitler poisoned himself and his wife, there was a Saturn Ceres picture in the sky, triggering his Ceres Chiron moon. So we could say Saturn. In fact, Saturn was opposite his moon when he killed himself. So we could say that Saturn was certainly a part of this, but that Ceres also talked about what was going on, that he ingested the poison. Yushchenko, this was a very handsome guy who had his face all pockmarked by dioxin. Natal Sun Ceres, Sun equals Ceres Chiron, a 2-minute orb, Sun equals Ceres Chiron. When he was poisoned, two things happened. The progressed node and Uranus were within a minute of each other, coming to the Ceres Chiron midpoint. And transiting Uranus was in Pisces, conjunct his sun. Also triggering the midpoint. But just that Uranus in Pisces conjunct the sun, that was a big message about that time frame. Probably my favorite part of this presentation is animals and Ceres Chiron. So Chiron was a vet. Among his many talents, he was a vet. And you see his image used in the logos of veterinary associations, like this one. Now, years ago, I studied with Eleanor Bach. Nobody uses her name anymore, but she was really the first to popularize the asteroids in the 1970s. And she was the one who referred to Ceres association with animals for food and for work. Now, that includes the veterinarians, and so veterinarians is part of the list of occupations symbolized by Ceres Chiron. We saw it in the obstetricians, and here it is in the vets. I had a sample of 9 vets. 7 out of 9 vets had an aspect or midpoint picture of Ceres Chiron, and 9 out of 12 animal activists had a natal picture of Ceres Chiron. So Vladimir Putin has no natal Ceres Chiron, but when transiting Chiron stationed, squaring his natal Ceres, he released a tiger from captivity. He set a tiger free. And that is a nice manifestation of Ceres Chiron and helping animals. But it works both ways. It also works where humans harm animals and animals harm humans. So Chris Reeve was thrown from a horse. He has a very rounded out chart with the MC on the Ceres Chiron midpoint. I put it here. I don't trust it exactly. But I do know that when progressed Chiron was 2 minutes from Ceres, he was thrown from a horse. Now here's Ozzy. He bit the head off a dove and a bat. So he had, what was this? This was the dove. When he had progressed Chiron to Ceres, he bit the head off a dove. And when he had transiting Ceres, let's just say he had an aspect between Ceres and Chiron, he bit the head off a bat, no natal symbolism, harmed animals on 2 Ceres Chiron contacts. Here's a guy who died with a sting with a stingray, Steve Irwin. He did not have the Sun or Aries at the midpoint. He had he had a Saturn-Uranus picture, number one. But he didn't have Sun or Aries at the midpoint, but he had Saturn and Uranus. You know, Saturn and Uranus is very open for inviting for accidents and arguments, and but accidents are part of Saturn-Uranus energies. And when Chiron, let me see what triggered this. Transiting Chiron triggered natal Saturn, and that means that it triggered the natal Ceres Chiron midpoint. Yeah, that's what happened. Transiting Chiron triggered off his Saturn Uranus and his Ceres Chiron. Here's a guy who practiced vivisection. He used 200 dog hearts to perfect the heart transplant. And the experiments began when Progress Chiron was squaring natal Ceres. And he had the natal aspect within 2 degrees. But when it was exact, he started the experiments where he used the dog hearts. Here's Ceres Chiron in fiction, the story of the 3 bears, tidy, trusting, and harmless, who, bears, not beets, these are 3 bears. They became the victims of a very dirty, badly behaved woman. She invaded their house, she ate their porridge, she broke their furniture. It was written by Robert Southey, and he was a natal Sun equals Venus Chiron person. Here's a poem about poison. She had the natal aspect, and she wrote this poem about poison when progressed Chiron was exact with progressed Ceres, 0 orb. She also wrote, Christina Rossetti, who, by the way, had a facial defect as a result of a birth disorder. So she had the appearance aspect of Ceres Chiron also, and you see it all over her work. Here she wrote a poem about poison. She also wrote a story called The Goblin Market, in which girls are intoxicated by fruit. And what's interesting, so when they got intoxicated by the fruit, they sort of tuned out to other people. They got high in a tuned out kind of way. That is imagery that is used in classical poetry. It's used in Ulysses, where they ate the lotus and they got high and they didn't care and they were alienated from other people. Anyway, she wrote a version of that, which was The Goblin Market. And there's also another poem called The Lotus Eaters by Tennyson. Same subject, the sailors eating the fruit. He had that sort of disengaged them from everybody. He had the natal aspect also. Thank you for joining me. I'm Faith McInerney. You can reach me at astrofaith@AOL, and please join me at Midpoint Observatory. If you're interested in midpoints, this is the place to go. See you next time.